Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is the Skinwalker Ranch and Paranormal Hitchhikers. And I'm delighted to be with Robert Bigelow, who is the former owner of the Skinwalker Ranch, the founder of the National Institute for Discovery Science that began research at the Bigelow Ranch, and also the supervisor of the OSAP program, a program funded by the United States government that also involved research at the Skinwalker Ranch. OSAP stands for Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. Welcome again, Robert.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Good to be back.
It's good to be with you. The Skinwalker Ranch, when you first bought it, was relatively unknown. Now, I think the TV series on the History Channel is in its fourth season. Of course, all of that publicity on the History Channel began after you sold the property. You were never really interested in the kind of publicity that's been generated, but it's become pretty famous at this point.
Yeah. Well, and it all started with a phone call from a government guy. And he said, you can, I'm going to give you the phone numbers to validate and verify that I am who I say I am. So this turned out to be Jim Lukaski. Mm-hmm. And so he was a senior manager for Defense Intelligence Agency, and he wanted to talk about the Skinwalker Ranch. And I'm thinking, what does this guy from DIA want to do with the Skinwalker Ranch? So that phone call was really very interesting. That precipitated the entire program, really.
And I assume the phone call came some years after you had already initiated research there.
It did. It definitely did. So we already had an organization set up in terms of our own staff, that security guards, and a veterinarian that could do necropsies was a permanent guy on our staff. And so in my philosophy on the Skinwalker Ranch was to protect it. In a sense, I was the groundskeeper in a way. I'm just the caretaker in a way. And I was trying to protect it from being overrun by people from the outside so that we could study what was going on there.
You purchased it, I think you indicated, around 1996.
Yes, somewhere around that time.
I've had a discussion on this channel with John Alexander, who was on your staff back in those days, who witnessed some extraordinary things there. We've talked to Colin Kelleher. And in fact, what I will do is, for viewers who are interested, I'm linking in the upper right-hand corner of your screen to those earlier interviews about the Skinwalker Ranch. But it's always associated with your name being the fact that you owned it for nearly 20 years.
Well, and we piggybacked on work that other people had done. There was a great book written by a biologist. He was a school teacher. He researched and came up with 400 legitimate cases of close encounters in the Uinta Basin. Mm-hmm. Frank Salisbury. And he wrote a very good book. And so that was my preliminary introduction to what's this whole valley about, what's going on here. And then we established relationships with the Sheriff's Department and Bureau of Indian Affairs, police, and we realized that a lot of the outlying and contingent ranches contiguous to Skinwalker had events happen all the time. Mm-hmm. But it was an amazing laboratory.
Well, I suppose many people might say you were very brave to purchase a place that was regarded, even by the man who sold it to you, as haunted.
Well, Terry Sherman was a pretty courageous guy. He lived there for a couple of years or so, and had his wife and his children there, and had all kinds of things happen that would have scared a normal person off the property a lot sooner. And then with his wife getting fired from the bank and everything, and just because she happened to mention to a couple of friends there what she was going through, it was quite amazing. The sidebar stories that he would tell us, and I think he came to NIDS and made a presentation.
And you saw it as a research opportunity.
Oh gosh, yes. And there were confirmations all over the place. Not just from our own staff, but our own staff, it's not fabricating things, but then of course neighbors and police officers and sheriff's people, and some of the sheriff's stories were amazing. A couple in particular, unbelievable.
But what was Lakatsky's interest? It must be strange that you got a phone call from a man, a high-ranking manager at the Defense Intelligence Agency, saying, we're interested in your haunted ranch.
I think he was interested in the locomotive capabilities of UFOs. He, by professional training, was a rocket engineer. And I think that had to be very intriguing for him as to how were these things doing what they were doing.
I would agree that's a very interesting topic, but one would think that there might be better locations than the ranch. Had a lot of paranormal phenomena. UFOs, to my knowledge, were a small part of that.
It is one of several locations in the United States that we had our eye on. In fact, before our program was canceled, I was getting prepared to have another location to either purchase it or make an arrangement to use it as another living laboratory. And it was within the there were two others within the United States. Yeah.
Which you didn't go ahead on.
No.
So at the ranch, you'd already been observing for several years before Lakatsky called you. One of the things I know that was associated with the property were cattle mutilations.
Right. Yeah, so I'm sure, the book goes into that. The calf mutilation was really interesting. And typically of all, it was very typical of all the mutilation cases, there's no blood on the ground, so how are you that neat and clean to be able to not disturb ground and there's no blood, so how did you eliminate that blood, right? And but there are many, many different kinds of mutilation stories that are really quite phenomenal. And predators will not like coyotes. They don't want anything to do with a mutilated cow. There's some kind of something they sense that keeps them up. They'll go so close, and then that's it. They won't chew on it. So it's never a function of predators caused the initial cavities and incisions and so forth that were made.
They seem to be made with surgical precision, not with animal teeth.
No, absolutely. And it's often said that it's the most successful crime because they have been in the thousands and nobody has ever been caught.
And it was, to my understanding, the cattle industry saw it as a real problem.
Well, the ranchers sure have in different places. Like Terry suffered financially, seriously for his cows being mutilated.
So that was it's a very serious mystery, still remains an unsolved mystery, and you had plenty of documentation of it at the ranch, but that didn't interest Lakatsky particularly.
I don't think so. I think that was a sidebar. Those kinds of things were sidebars. I think the spooks at the shadow figures walk through the rooms, through one wall and through to another wall. I think my guess is he would have loved to get his hands on the propulsion topic.
But spooks walking through walls or shadows that seem to walk through walls. And there are many other things I know that were observed, apparent poltergeist kinds of events, psychokinetic activity, but none of that would be particularly of interest to Lekatsky either.
Not in a direct kind of way. I think an ancillary kind of peripheral way it was, because he was still a scientist because he had curiosity. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of scientists stop being scientists, is they stop having curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's a function of they're intimidated by their peers to the point to where they don't dare express an interest in something that's esoteric, right? And at that point, I think they've lost the essence of being a scientist.
I mean, I've heard people criticize the work on the Skinwalker Ranch, saying it was supposed to be about UFO research, but you came up with very little regarding spacecraft, UFOs as crafts. No, I don't think there were any photographs or any sightings more extraordinary than the thousands of others that are reported all the time.
We began having a shift. And from what Terry Sherman saw was spacecraft and spacecraft demonstrations, including the cattle mutilations, but spacecraft demonstrations.
You mean there were spacecraft associated
in his fields? In fact, we were there when Davis and
Eric Davis,
and I think Colin was in the field at that time. I'm not sure. When there was a spacecraft commingled in the top of cottonwood trees. It was blocking out some of the limbs and some of the stars. And there was a telepathic exchange going on, or broadcast to Eric at that time. But we had balls of light that would dance around, but we didn't have a proliferation, though, like Terry Sherman did. But it shifted for us more into the consciousness kind of activity. So maybe you had, discarnate beings, or something that was co-dimensional with the ET beings that was discarnate.
And I know you've reported to me how, all the orbs that were photographed. And in fact, you in particular seem to have a talent for photographing these orbs.
I would work with a select one or two of our security guys and nobody else. And I would say, here's what I want you to do. And a lot of people didn't even know that this was going on, And so the ball and jack experiment was widely known because somebody else came up with that. It might have been one of our security people, I don't remember. And that was a really good idea. And it worked. It was really acted upon. We took before and after pictures. And it was great how, we had good control of the environment, but not enough to aggravate the performance. Like if you had cameras, you're aggravating it.
So the ball and jack experiment, can you explain that for our viewers?
So we got good-sized jacks that were probably an inch square and a ball the size of a golf ball, roughly, maybe a little smaller. And so our ranch manager and one of our security officers used the kitchen table in the double-wide trailer to set it up. So they arranged them in a circle, and they put the ball in the middle of the circle. And we took a photograph. And they weren't done very neatly. And the reason we knew that is because after they were acted upon, we saw how neatly they were set up. Okay. So they were set up so the ranch manager, security guy go outside. There's nobody else in the trailer. They wait 30 seconds and come back in. Nothing's been changed. They go back outside. They wait a minute. They come back in. Everything's changed. It's not a circle, it's a horseshoe. The ball is outside of the horseshoe. All of the jacks were paired in color. In fact, when we did the before and after photographs, I had Charles had photographs there, and I said, "Now look at these jacks. What do you notice?" Well, he didn't make a comment too much, but I said, "Well, look, every single color is that we have pairs of colors, and they're all paired."
It sounds as if it was some sort of an effort to really communicate.
I think that's what demonstrations are. Mm-hmm. I think that, you have 1,000 different kinds or 1,000,000 different kinds of demonstrations in the consciousness world. And I think all of that is a communication. Mm-hmm. It's not just, oh, here, look at me, I move something for you. It's, I move something, and I'll figure out what it took to move it. Why did it move? How did it move? And so you start thinking about that, and you realize, well, it's not in our physics, and it's in another dimension is interacting in our dimension, and with ease, with impunity, with ease, and any time, and very powerfully.
And I guess a very important thing to cover are what are known as the hitchhikers that people experience, that you experienced.
I did, and we all did. Column did. All of the government people that all of them did, and too seriously. In a sense that they weren't physically hurt. I'm trying to think of the wife and the 2 children. I don't think they were physically hurt. They were just being constantly traumatized by so many really weird things manifesting. Creatures, very weird things. And the other guys, these were people from different agencies, different military and, different backgrounds. And our own program manager was on property for an hour. And he had a custom demonstration for him. And the thing that's neat about demonstrations is that you don't forget them because they're so unique and profound if you look at the how and what it took, and then you start to pay attention to more of other people's stories because you've had personal experiences. And you can trade stories, but in their situation, you learn by their stories as to something that you haven't read about or encountered yourself personally. And that's what the whole, the research and the adventure really is about learning.
So there were government employees, military intelligence people who came out from Washington to visit this ranch in Utah. And when they returned to their homes in Washington, it seemed as if the types of phenomena that occurred typically at the ranch began occurring sometimes right in their homes.
Yeah, it wouldn't be that things are repeated exactly. That hardly ever occurs, that they're exactly repeated. And it also occurs when the phenomena feels like it, when it wants to. And also, like I would have somebody ready with a camera, and I would say to him, all right, now, when you just get the sense that you should, that the urge to go ahead and take that photograph and point it at a certain place, do it right then. Don't question it, just do it as you have that urge to do it, because something may be urging you to do it. And he caught some amazing things. One, an object lifting off of a dresser. One where the photons wouldn't go beyond the edge of the bed.
Oh?
Yeah. He was laying in bed and took pictures, and there's a dresser and a mirror on the wall, and 4 feet of space between the end of the footboard for the bed and the dresser. Photons stopped at the edge of the bed, and there was a very faint outline of something beyond. But those photons should never have stopped in that short a distance.
It suggests the possibility of being able to detect whatever this presence is.
Well, from him, but it's just the lesson is the presence can tweak what you couldn't tweak on your camera.
Yeah.
And who could? Who can create a bar of light that's just light, that's not in physical enclosure of any kind? My wife had that happen.
And there are examples in the spiritualist literature as well.
Those are really interesting lessons because you can't stop these photons coming from your lights in this room. These walls could be another 10 feet out, and you'd still have some light that would show on a surface.
Right.
But boom, not right past here. No. And then they would have like a full Sasquatch creature standing in the doorway, filling up the entire doorway.
At their home in
the double wide.
On the property. Yeah. On the property.
These things were done on property. I did a lot of experiments where I said, okay, here's what I want you to do there. And then we did one series where I was asking for things to show up I was asking in Las Vegas for things to show up at the ranch and being witnessed by at least 2 people, with the proof being a digital camera. So they were orbs, and they needed to be assembled. I was asking for certain geometries. And I got 3 out of 4 dead correct. And the 4th one I got cavalier, overconfident, and careless. My fault. And 3 of 4 orbs were in the right position. The 4th one was not. And I think I lost my concentration, I lost my focus.
Well, you have shown me images where it looked like there might have been hundreds of orbs in the picture.
Oh, and even thousands. And I can't find the key picture. I've been looking for that picture to show you, where one is it's so bright, enveloping this man sitting on a chair who was sick, complaining of being sick, and his partner was there with a camera. And there's all darkness behind him. And there was no ambient light from moonlight or anything, because outside this darkness, you could see the outline of maybe a tree or a building or something. It was black, black, black. And then they're asking for help and kind of praying and so on. And all of a sudden, oh my gosh, it's so bright. You can't identify anything except light in a large area around him. And then it starts to get to where it thins out. And out here, you can start to count some individual ones that aren't so clustered that you can't count them.
And was he healed?
Yeah, he absolutely was, right there on the spot. He felt great.
This was at the ranch?
Yeah, at night. Yeah, of course, at night.
Well, I think you told me at one time you were getting so many orbs that you began to get tired of them.
I was actually getting a little, Jeffrey, I was getting, I hate to say it, I was getting a little bored. And because I could take pictures anytime I wanted around my house, outside, inside, and if I had them taking them outside and I wanted bigger ones, I could request it, or more of them. They would happen. And I was just friggin' spoiled. I was spoiled. And I think maybe those were the early days of the aerospace company. And so I was really trying to push that company to make it be something. Right, And, but wow, then my wife would have these visitations and these inside the house. And years before that, we had a Poltergeist event that was fun. My wife always went, and we both did a big out for Halloween. We had a lot of great things to give away. Tables full of stacks of things, like half-pound candy bars if we could find them and everything. Oh, yeah. And so it was Halloween Eve. And and in the front foyer of the house, it was hardwood floors, and then the staircase going up, and dining room and living room off to the left and right before you go up the stairs. And so the tables are all spread out, and it's 11 o'clock at night. We're all ready for tomorrow for the kids. And we're laying there talking. All of a sudden, crash, bang, bang, boom, 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 boom. And it sounded like packages of malt balls or jawbreakers just opened up and went all over the hardwood floor. Bum, 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 bum. The sound lasted for several seconds. 1, 2, 3, at least that long. And I said, okay, I'll go clean it up. And she said, okay, all right. So I said, just stay here. I'll go take care of it. So I go down the stairs. Nothing's wrong. Nothing. The poltergeist had given the noise, but not the three-dimensional effect, but the noise. Produced the noise. So he had to have a lot of fun. So I can appreciate that. He was having or she was having a good time, and that's okay. And so Diane didn't believe me. She got out of bed and came downstairs because she said, "Oh, come no, well I'm coming down," and she couldn't believe her eyes that nothing was wrong. The tables were perfect.
Was this before the Skinwalker Ranch?
I think it was. We hadn't. I don't think we'd been in the house all that long. We had been there eventually for 33 years, but I don't think we'd been there all that long. Maybe 8 years or something before Skinwalker.
Well, I know you have to get to the airport soon, so we should wrap up this particular segment. But in closing, I gather that the reason you sold the Skinwalker Ranch ultimately was that people were having these hitchhiker effects, that they were being troubled by poltergeist activity and creatures that would appear in their backyards, and you felt helpless. You didn't know how you could protect these people.
Yeah. I think there were several reasons. That was the biggest one, that I had no way of really knowing how much things were going to get carried away, and which we later had to prepare for separately, and it happened. But so harm coming to people was number one. Number two, we were going full bore in the aerospace company, and by 2017, that was before COVID and before my wife's passing, and she passed in February of 2020, and so I was her caretaker in 2019, 18, and 17, 16. She didn't want nurses around, so I was her caretaker. The aerospace was a big part of that, and we just kind of, I guess, maybe outgrowing it isn't quite the right word, because how can you ever outgrow something so phenomenal? I think it is, we weren't too sure what else we should do with it. And we kept having these demonstrations and so forth, but we didn't particularly want to respond to, you want to come over to our side? So, well, no, wait a second. What does that entail? We're not sure about that. No, no, all in good time.
You mean you felt like there was an invitation?
Well, we didn't want it to get to that point. How much do you try to communicate, and then things are set up more and more and more and more suggestive and so on. You don't want what could happen or anything like that. So, and because a lot of things that we were doing shouldn't have succeeded. So we had some kind of a rapport going on, right? So we were getting to know you, right? Getting to know all about you. Yeah. So we weren't in the dating frame of mind yet. We were just trying to understand the who and the parameters. And we have nothing to do with control. We have nothing to do with stopping you from anything, or, we try to be as much in harmony as we can. And, my philosophy for the other side is, I think, really boils down to two things. Stop asking what they can do for me. I want to know, what can I do for the other side? That's number one. Is there something or some things I can do for the other side that's meaningful? And the second is, what advice and wisdom can you offer us as to how should we operate and manage our institute, BIX.
Yeah.
What can we? So I'm trying to get advice from the other side, and they could say, we've been trying to tell you that's what all these hunches are for, all this intuition for that you've been ignoring. We've been pounding on your door, just like the story about God and the guy on the roof of his house and the flood.
Right.
And he's praying, and finally here comes a guy with a boat, and the guy says, "No, I'm praying for God for help." And here comes another guy with a boat, and he says, "No, I'm praying for God for help." Finally, no more boats. He says, "You've forsaken me, God. Why have you forsaken me?" And the voice says, "What do you want? I just sent you 2 boats." But,
Well, Robert, this has been a great conversation. It's certainly a window into your world and into the world of the paranormal, a very important window. And I know we'll be back again with more interviews talking about the future. What can we learn from the other side, and how can we, if at all, be of assistance to them?
Okay.
So thank you.
I look forward to it.
Thank you for being with me, Robert.
Thank you.
And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us. You are the reason we are here. We've just released issue number 2 of the New Thinking Aloud quarterly magazine. You can download a free copy at the New Thinking Aloud Foundation website, newthinkingaloud.org. I imagine that by now, many of you already realize that in conjunction with White Crow Books, we've just launched the New Thinking Aloud Dialogues book imprint, and our first title is there life after death?